Hello, our story today is When Fear Attacks and is based on Joshua. Regardless of our situation, following Jesus requires all of us to repeatedly exercise courage. The Lord frequently calls us to face and do things that we're afraid of, and Joshua, the son of Nun, is an example for us. His call was to lead Israel battle after battle, decade after decade, facing strong army after strong army in order to occupy the land that the Lord had promised. Through the imagined reminiscence of one of Joshua's soldiers, let's ponder what it means to learn the lifelong habit of exercising strong and courageous faith. Joshua 1:9. Here we are, said Amadai, as he and his 17-year-old son Levi approached the simply but lovingly carved exterior of the tomb cave holding the remains of Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' successor and Israel's beloved general-in-chief. Early that morning, they had departed their home in Janoah, nestled in the northwest hills of Ephraim, and made the 25-mile hike to Joshua's city, Timnath-Serah. Levi, now taller than his father, looked very much a man, except for the wispy, premature beard. But it would not be long before he would enlist in Israel's army. Amattai had planned this pilgrimage as part of his son's preparation. The 9-hour walk had flown by. Father and son engrossed in a verbal history of Israel's great victories under Joshua over the 31 kings of Canaan. They dissected strategy, tactics, geography, topography, weaponry, and feats of faith, force, and failure. Amadai was a mine of fascinating stories and military feats. His father, Chileab, had fought in the many battles and served under Joshua for 21 years until a fever took him at 41. The age of Amadai was now. Now Amadai himself had fought in the last few battles when Joshua was a very old man. Standing at the great man's cave, the father asked, "Can you remember meeting Joshua?" "A little," said Levi. "I don't really remember his face. I remember him being old and putting his hand on my head and saying something to me. I remember feeling scared of him, and you telling me to stand up straight." And Maddie smiled. "You were only 4 or 5, and he died when you were 6. "Well, what do you remember about Joshua?" asked Levi. And Maddie thought, and as he pulled up some grass that had taken root near the tombstone, careful not to touch the grave itself. "He was the most humble and most courageous man I've ever known," replied Amadai. "His humility made him ruthlessly honest about himself. I was amazed at how plainly he talked about his fears and sins, what most men try to hide from each other." "Fears? I thought Joshua was fearless," said Levi, surprised. "Well, he seemed fearless because he was so courageous, but he taught me a lesson about fear and courage that I've never forgotten. I had only been in the army a few weeks and hadn't seen any real fighting yet. 6 or 7 of us entested warriors were sitting around a fire one evening talking about the impending battle with Aphek. We were all blowing a lot of brave-sounding hot air because none of us wanted to look like a coward, though inside we were all pretty scared. Suddenly, Joshua stepped into the firelight. We all jumped up, hoping he hadn't overheard our foolish talk. He had. He said to us, "So, none of you young men are afraid to fight Aphek?" We all glanced at each other and shook our heads, lying. Then he said, "Well, you're all better men than I am. I frequently had to face down fear, even after all these years." Hearing this shook us a bit. We all believed Joshua feared nothing. I can still see him staring into the fire and saying, "I'll tell you when fear hits me. When I see a strong king and his army arrayed around us with hundreds of swift chariots and a forest of spears, in that moment, the Lord's promises seem to drain out of my memory, and I start thinking about that this battle is up to me. That's when doubts attack. I can doubt my judgment. I can doubt our strategy, our weapons, our timing, our numbers. I remember how Moses led us, and I can doubt my ability to lead. At that point, fear becomes my most dangerous enemy. The fear is paralyzing." Then he looked up at us and said, "That's why the Lord has had to tell me many times to be strong and courageous. He knows the fears I'm vulnerable to. And what I've learned is this: it requires real strength, both to remember what the Lord has promised to do for us and to move my trust off myself and back to Him. And it requires real courage to act on what the Lord's promises tell me, not what I'm doubting fears tells me. It takes strength to trust the Lord and courage to obey Him. And when Joshua turned to leave, he said to us, "You men may not struggle like me, but someday it may help you to remember that courage is often not the absence of fear, but the conquering of it." I can tell you, Levi, Joshua's words have helped me conquer 1,000 fears, and Maddie said, and then reaching over and placing an affectionate hand on the back of Levi's neck, he said, "Son, that's the strength and courage you'll need, no matter what battle you're facing." Our process is becoming like Jesus, Romans 8:29, as well as our progress in building His kingdom is often slow and difficult, much like Israel's taking of the promised land. Each battle and each foe is different. If we learn not to fear one foe, it's not guaranteed that we won't have to overcome fear when facing another. And some foes will always stir up fear in us. Each encounter calls for new strength and courage. But fear doesn't have to discourage us. It is the Lord's design. Facing our fear tests our faith, and faith is what pleases God, Hebrews 11:6. God desires that we grow strong in faith, Romans 4:20, and the constant practice of exercising faith produces strong, mature faith in us, Hebrews 5:14. So, it should not surprise us that God frequently tests our faith by making us face things we fear, 1 Peter 4:12 and James 1:3. So when fear attacks, rather than surrendering and fleeing from it, let's remind us that our call is to conquer fear, no more than conquer it through Him who loved us, Romans 8:37. When we are forced to repeatedly be strong and courageous, Joshua 9, it teaches us the habit of mustering the strength to remember God's promises and the courage to act in faith. It is through faith that we learn not to fear anything that is frightening, 1 Peter 3:6. And thank you for listening today. Have a wonderful day.